There is a connection between the paranormal, UFOs, and the myths of ancient history. The clues are scattered across the landscape from a forbidden past, maybe even in your own backyard. There is a connection between the true nature of our reality, consciousness, and the unexplained. I'm Carl the Crusher. Let's explore the unknown. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Crusher crew. I'm excited about this one tonight. All of the historical evidence that goes back into the original psychic spy program and its origins and how all of that began and how it had key moments and key figures that occurred over that critical history that have led us up to now, where today we actually have whistleblowers coming out wide in the open as Delta Force operators, Green Beret Special Forces operators, nuclear commanders, and people who are like brigadiers in the Air Force, and they're stepping forward and saying that this is a real phenomenon. So it's pretty cool. Like a week or two ago, I posted a whole video and we did a premiere where we went into a deep dive on the history of how a lot of people didn't know that Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell was actually involved in the psychic spy program. And so we're just going to touch base on that again really quick, and then we're going to get right into the whole thing and how it all fits together. It's pretty amazing. So in this photo, this is a critical piece of the puzzle, and we're going to go deeper and deeper into this because this picture was missing for a long time. And it is a photo of psychic spy Uri Geller, physicist Hal Puthoff, Verner Von Braun, and then Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell all together. And Uri Geller has come out and told an incredible story when it comes to that photograph. He even says the name of who was there and who took the photograph, how it all happened and all that. So we're going to get into that. But there are some really important people like Hal Puthoff here on the left. Kit Green is in the blue jacket and the tie, Russell Targ and Pat Price. These are all the originators of the psychic spy program at Stanford Research Institute that started the remote viewing. Before that, though, was this guy, Andrei Puharich. Andrei Puharich was a researcher, a physicist. He was interested in lasers, in radar technology, and he was also fascinated in psychedelic compounds. He is the originator and the story that the entire TV show Stranger Things is based off of. That's on Netflix. That whole show is about a research facility in Montauk where these children were tested for psychic abilities. And during those experiments, the kids were exposed to light waves and radio waves and isolation tanks. And as they did that, the experiment interfaced with the kids in the community playing Dungeons and Dragons, and the imagination from the kids playing Dungeons and Dragons and talking about the Demogorgon created the entire upside down, or an entire realm that came into reality and is the entire plot of that show, Stranger Things. That entire show is based off of a true story called Montauk, the Montauk Project. And guess who was actually working at Montauk when all of those real experiments were going on? Andrei Puharich was. He was actually there. And his laboratory was up in Maine. This is an old documentary. I think it's called The Sacred Mushroom. And this is very early in his career when he was going down to South America and doing telepathy testing and experiments for psychic abilities by combining psychedelics like ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, and things like that to see if they could use either compounds, medicines, psychedelics, light patterns, radio frequencies, anything that they could do to take the human mind and basically open the third eye and achieve telepathic abilities. And this was all during the Cold War with Russia. So in this old documentary, it's really fascinating because you've got one of the original scientists that came out of Montauk, the whole legends of all of that, the beginning of this whole psychic spy program. And he started out going down to ancient, to to locations where ancient indigenous people have lived for thousands of years. And he first initially went to the indigenous people and the shaman and tried to learn about their methods. And of course, before they understand meditation and the consciousness side of things, they're all looking at, well, it must be the magic mushrooms. It must be this. There must be frequencies. There's got to be something to it.
Dr. Puharich?
During our stay in Hukila, I witnessed quite a number of cases of extrasensory perception by the Brujos, some of which we could not film, as you know, John. These, in addition to the ones we did film, and the work which we have done since our return, convinces me that the mushroom contains a chemical which is most promising for the further investigation of extrasensory perception.
When this program began, the question was, were the claims for the mushroom true or false? Well, for those of us who made the journey, the answer is true.
And this is where it starts to get a little bit deeper and more interesting, because now that we've seen kind of some of what Andrei Puharich was doing and just a little touch of that, it's a very deep rabbit hole. We actually have on the CIA website valid evidence showing that him and Captain Edgar Mitchell, look at the bottom of the page, they actually submitted a paper that is part of the CIA documents now about direct brain perception and direct brain action. And it says in those notes over there, this is, here, I'll pause it here. This is written about Uri Geller. It says right here. And then up at the top, notice it says SRI. That stands for Stanford Research Institute. So those are the notes put on there. So there's the direct connection that we have between an actual scientist that was a part of the Montauk Project, the whole Stranger Things experiment, like the real one. I mean, there's some creepy stories that came out of that place. It's connected even to the Philadelphia experiment about how they hooked up frequencies and they made that entire naval ship like disappear, and it teleported and reappeared. And then all of the people on board of the ship were like melted into the metal and into the hull of the ship. And some people went missing and went crazy. And it's pretty wild. There was all kinds of different sorts of unethical experiments that were going on back in these early days. And honestly, in the current disclosure that's coming out, a lot more of this is starting to get talked about. And we're going to hear more about this, about kids being used for experimentation is going to start to come out a lot more. I think that Stephen Greer's even mentioning that with Danny Sheehan recently on some podcasts, and a lot of that interesting things that we've been talking about here on the Carl Crusher channel for like over 4 years now. So it's pretty interesting. But there's the evidence right there linking Edgar Mitchell and Andrei Puharich directly together, trying to submit research papers in order to get funding for this project. So they were directly connected. And this is kind of, whether you like it or not, whether you think these people are legitimate, whether you think they're hoaxers, or whether you think they're even like Israeli spies, that's up to you. But this is really kind of where the psychic spy program originated. So there you have Andrei Puharich with Uri Geller. Now, it's important to note here that Andrei Puharich found Uri Geller when Uri was a child, when he was just like a young boy. So we have no idea how young Uri was exactly, and exactly what experiments were done, or if the entire story of Stranger Things is actually based off of these two guys. Like Andrei Puharich and his work with Uri is the actual story of the main scientist in Stranger Things, and 11, the little girl with psychic powers that was subjected to all these experiments. So it's literally like the exact same story, but these are the real people. So you have Andrei Puharich and Uri Geller. And Uri Geller is the same guy who used to go around on TV and try to do telepathy, to do spoon bending. He would try to bend silverware and everything with his mind. And so that was kind of the public side of it. But behind the scenes back at Stanford, they were actually doing real experiments where they were seeing if he could move magnetometers, if he could affect gamma wave signals and all kinds of stuff just by thinking about it. So We're going to get a little bit deeper into that. But knowing that these two started together is critical. Uri Geller says that when he first met Andrei Puharich, that they like walked out into a field together. Andrei Puharich left him alone, and then an extraterrestrial came and visited Uri Geller, and he had like a whole mystical vision and an experience. And then they became like colleagues exploring this whole thing. And we don't know if Andrei Puharich was just doing experiments on Uri Geller, or if he really did have telepathy and this was a genuine thing, and then it just got scooped up into the dark projects and kind of became a messy subject. So it's a really, really interesting topic. But the fact that these two guys are together is really critical, because when you hear the history of this, you hear a lot about Hal Puthoff and the remote viewing program, but everybody overlooks Andrei Puharich and all of the background history that he did. He actually wrote several books about Uri Geller. And not only that, he also wrote books about how during his experiments with Uri Geller, he achieved some kind of a radio frequency or technology that tapped into his own mind, and that he was started to suddenly channel and get clairvoyant messages from ancient Egyptian gods and weird stuff. And so we're going to get into that a little bit deeper too. But this is actually all of them together at the Stanford Research Institute. This is Uri Geller. That is astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell. There's Hal Puthoff. I'm not sure who the guy in the glasses is. It'll say in a minute. There's Dr. Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and these other officials. They're all there. And there's other people there too. Bob Monroe from the Monroe Institute was also there. This is a picture from the old laboratory of Andrei Puharich. This is the actual story of where the show Stranger Things came from, is from this right here. They would have, this was the beginnings of it. They ultimately had entire rooms. And then this all evolved into not only SRI at the Stanford Research Institute, but also the Gateway Project at the Monroe Institute with Bob Monroe. But one of the physicists that worked with Andrei Puharich and knew him from the Montauk Project directly was this guy, physicist Dan Winter. And he has a whole YouTube channel. He's a plasma physicist. And a while ago, when I was hiking up a canyon, all of this kind of came together for me. So I put a video clip together with him talking about what really happened at Montauk, what they learned about ancient sacred sites like ancient Egypt, and how it affects human consciousness.
It's true that when I was much younger, I seemed to have the blessing or the coincidence that I got to know so many people involved in these kinds of projects, like Puharich, Bentoff, Preston Nichols, Al Felix. I knew all those people incredibly well, actually. Yeah, I mean, very well. What do you say? And I seem to be the Forrest Gump of the consciousness psychotronic generation. I'm not sure what that means. But anyway, since those stories were integral to my original upbringing and education in the psychotronic study of, electronic devices which are psychoactive, which I have been studying all my life from when I was graduate electrical engineering operator of the polygraph in the psychophysiology clinic at the University of Detroit, this was my life. So if I can be of service in trying to make sense of some of these stories and turn them into useful educational lessons, that's why I'm here. And we're here to empower, especially young people, to understand the pure principles which are empowering behind what on the surface look like messy, ugly stories. There is some self-empowerment here. So where do I start? Most of the people that I met, which ended up being intimately connected with the Montauk Project, and I must say I wasn't there very much myself. No, I lived in New York State, but all the people, it seemed like I was rubbing shoulders with every other day. Why? Well, I was an early speaker at the U.S. Psychotronics Association for, 20 or 30 years. In fact, my 1987 lecture to the U.S. Psychotronics Association has gone viral 30 years later on my YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, talking about being and consciousness. I mean, we were scratching our heads about physics of consciousness for a long time. Anywho, so what does this have to do with Montauk? Remember, the central principle behind what psychotronics called a psychologically active electric circuit, the central principle is embodied in one simple conundrum, messy problem, which was, if you take a simple hunk of wire and touch both ends to your car battery, it's going to blow up and probably kill you. Now, however, if you take that same chunk of wire and wind it into a caduceus, aha, up and down coil, think phase conjugation. I didn't know that a caduceus was phase conjugation till many years later. But if you wind a caduceus and touch the same wire, the same battery, it's going to stay cool. But if you point that at your friend at their solar plexus, they're going to feel nausea.
Mm.
And so there we were for 30 years, and I mean 30 years, scratching our heads. Why? Now I know exactly why. Because if you conjugate that electric field down a caduceus, optimized by golden ratio, that's going to convert the transverse wave to a longitudinal at the point, and you point the longitudinal wave at somebody.
Mm.
You're creating feeling, you're creating gravity, you're creating implosion, you're creating centripetal force. Ultimately, you're making a Stargate. I mean, heck, there's all kinds of gorgeous, powerful, beautiful physics if you really know what a caduceus is, hence Thoth Hermes, who's central behind all these stories. So this was fundamental to all of our conversations. So now in walks, let's talk the first person on this list, Andrea Puharich. Now, Andrea Puharich, you know, I was explaining to Elena Danaan the other day how he got to be the first guy that talked to Enki Tom Atun, which became the story of the Nine. Well, how did that happen? Well, Andrea Puharich was studying how you use audio heterodyning in capacitors behind the ears. And if you perfect that heterodyning to be phase conjugate, you suddenly have a bit of clairaudience. Except Puharich didn't call it clairaudience. No, he simply called it, oh, how shall we trigger people's ears so deaf people can hear? But during the time that Andrea Puharich is patenting these circuits to use capacitors to phase couple capacitively entrain the bones near the ear and induce hearing in the deaf. He was expert at this. And the pictures I have, this is all in the slideshow, fractalfield.com/slideshow. You will see the pictures. Anywho, suddenly he's studying clairvoyance, and one day who's making the phone calls to him? This guy named Tom Atun. Atun? Tom. Who was Tom? Oh, turns out that was Enki. And this is where Phyllis Schlemmer, educated by Puharich, teaches what became eventually Deep Space Nine and Star Trek. Started that day, and I was kind of there.
But actually, we want to get to that issue by understanding what happens when you survive compression. For example, if you go to a place called a sacred site where magnetic lines cross strongly and you have visions, which the Aboriginal would call songline or dreaming track. And this is a clue, because part of our understanding of soul and how we survive death is the electrical understanding of lucid dreaming. So at a sacred site, the reason you have better dreams and better vision and better telepathy, the magnetic line cross created compression. Actually, it's a very particular kind of compression. It's well known that the Earth grid magnetic lines crossed just like this, called anti-gravity in the world grid. It was first the Becker-Hagen's grid. This is the grid of sacred sites where magnetic lines cross, yes? Like, for example, where the pyramids and sacred sites are located. They all fit this nest. So actually, this is a map of the major magnetic lines of Earth, for sure. Well known, actually, it's well proven. The pyramid sites, for example. So it has been measured many times that at these sites, telepathy is far more possible. And this was the work of Konstantin Korotkov and Kozyrev from Russia. And it's also been measured that at these sites, nuclear critical mass is reduced. Compression at these sacred sites is called a longitudinal node, because the longitudinal waves bounce in and out of compression at the symmetrical fractal nodes, exchanging inertia between transverse and longitudinal. So the longitudinal wave, you can't feel it unless you get to the center of compression, and then you can do what's called embed in the array, which is That's why if you lie at a sacred site and close your eyes, suddenly you can see the whole hologram for miles around from the inside. You're inhabiting the array. It's why the Aboriginals called it dreaming track songline. If you have access to sacred sites or where magnetic lines cross, you can, it's called, you can use the DNA radio. And the frequencies there are a caduceus called the Schumann harmonics, which technically actually is a perfect caduceus. It's a caduceus of harmonics. That's what Schumann is, which is called a phase conjugate pump wave. It just means implosive. For example, the pyramids use the Schumann harmonics, which is that perfect geometry of harmonics.
For non-scientists, please give an understandable explanation of what the array is.
Well, it's kind of well known that the Earth grid is a dodecaecosa. Most everybody has seen, Bruce Cathy and Anti-Gravity of the World Grid, Becker and Huygens. The sacred sites and the pyramids of the planet are universally, everybody knows, are on a dodecaecosa array. And that's where Bruce Cathy proved radioactive critical mass is reduced. That's where Kozyrev and Korotkov proved commercial telepathy is possible. So those are obviously compression nodes for sure. And in fact, so when the waves, the more compressional part of the aura called longitudinal emerges from the body's squirt gun during bliss, those compression waves, which are longitudinal, they will pass through about anything except another node in the array. And at each node, they exchange inertia with the transverse component. So when Ingo Swann, he lit a flame with his mind at a distance, we know the brainwave signature that enabled him to do it, because the longitudinal wave emerges from the blissful aura, and it bounces to another node in the array, where it can then exchange inertia, and the longitudinal wave has no heat. But when it bounces at the next node and exchanges inertia with the transverse there, you can then contain heat at a distance. In fact, longitudinal interferometry is the only physics of all action at a distance and all miracles and spiritual stories.
So the nodes of the array do not access time space, or do? You said there was something like the waves do not access the nodes.
No.
They access different.
The longitudinal wave can go right through a Faraday cage, no problem. Ingo Swann proved it. But when it hits the nodes of an array, the compression point, and implodes again, that's the place where it exchanges inertia, which is transverse, called heat. So because you can do that interferometry accurately, you can steer, not just contain heat at a distance, a solution to all fusion experiments, but the solution to all portals and remote viewing and that kind of stuff.
Okay, but the array itself. So right now we're in 3D space.
Well, an array.
It tells me, right? So we're outside of the array, so to speak.
Well, if you have any skill at dowsing at all and go out in your yard and find a strong magnetic line cross point, test it for yourself. Does not the remote viewing and the telepathy and the bliss and the Agnihotra and the Theraphi and everything always works better there? That's called a compressional node in the array. It's been proven. That's where you get telepathy, where you get reduced critical mass. That's the only place the Ark of the Covenant actually works. Anyway, so when you can find these compression nodes, you find the magic, because that is the communication with collective unconscious, ancestor memory.
I'm curious, do you think a large monument or a man-made structure could create one of these nodes?
Well, they said the Cistercian cathedrals were named Cistercians because they built them over the cistern. And the cistern was actually a node in a longitudinal array. But then they realized that if you built a good cathedral, you will attract your own blind spring, dead tower, underground water. So it runs both ways. The water comes to where the magnetic lines converge, or the magnetic lines converge, start where the water converges. Either way, it is the physics of a node in an array. It's called a blind spring in geobiology. But so yes, you can make one, absolutely. And eventually that's how they bring the underground water back at Vukovar after the war. The ladies put in the labyrinth, imploded magnetism, and the underground water came back up. A net of coherent wave nodes, in this case, specifically fractal based on golden ratio.
So other nodes are magnetic in nature.
Well, the different electro versus magnetic just refers to the difference of the flux this way versus the flux this way on a torus. It's all the same flux. So they are a compression point in the nodes of flux or charge in the array, and every compression point has a component which is transverse.
So are nodes of the array everywhere? Are they in space?
Well, yeah, but you see, in an aluminum building in a god-awful city, you ain't got much because there's not much compression being distributed. So your telepathy turns off and your remote viewing turns off. You go into a forest and you find a sacred site, and yeah.
We have the Earth is embedded in this electromagnetic field and actually made of different densities and waveforms of this electromagnetic field. And those go transverse and longitudinal. So they go horizontal and vertical out into space and all around and through all things. Like we would call it the ether. To us, it just looks like dark matter or a vacuum or emptiness. And we can't even really see it, but we can measure it and we can feel it. And what's interesting, what he's saying is that when you go to these ancient sites, sit in these nodes or even sleep overnight or sit there and meditate, you harmonize, just like two tuning forks getting into sympathetic frequency, you harmonize your consciousness. And then the signal of your consciousness jumps from the antenna of your body to the array or to the bigger antenna of the whole canyon, which is where all that ancestral memory sits, like a library. All those people that lived there for thousands of years and everything that they did, all their wisdom and knowledge suddenly comes through, and you feel it when you go to these places. That's why sometimes when you go there, it gets real quiet and you're like, woo, you feel the hair stand up on the back of your neck and like something's watching you. And if you stay after dark, it gets even spookier. And this is 100% why we have places like Skinwalker Ranch, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. We have people like Jay Stratton flat out saying that they've seen non-human intelligence, and they saw it literally on their first day visiting a place like Skinwalker Ranch. That's literally how all this fits. I know it's a History Channel TV show. I know we keep talking about Stranger Things and Stargate and movies like Deep Space Nine or whatever, but these things are almost just like the public perception of what like may have really happened at certain levels. Either that or that's the psyop, right? Now, think back for a second. We started all this in the last video focusing on this topic, in the beginning of this one, talking about Edgar Mitchell and Apollo 14, his trip to the moon and back. So this idea that you could go to an ancient canyon, immerse yourself like, or sit in the bottom of the pyramids in Egypt in the king's chamber or something and meditate and then receive messages from the ancient gods. And all of a sudden you say, oh, I understand what ancient Egypt is all about. I understand where they got this from. It comes through that ether by you going and connecting into it, just like you would plug into the Wi-Fi. And all of a sudden you're in the network and you're surfing the internet of the universe, you know, and space-time. And so what they did was Apollo 14 astronaut, he did remote viewing and did a secret experiment. He pretends like he didn't do it for NASA, but he's actually friends with Verner Von Braun and everything. But he actually did remote viewing 4 different times on his trip to the moon and back.
You did conduct an ESP experiment. It is now known. What were the results of that experiment? What'd you do?
Well, the standard sort of test that had been done in the laboratory by J.B. Ryan and other people for 30 years or more. I just simply conducted it in that environment. And I can only quote the results statistically because that's the way it was set up. The probability that chance could have produced our results was 1 in 3,000.
1 in 3,000.
So it was statistically a significant test.
So you had arranged, I guess, with somebody on Earth to be receiving, and you were going to 4 people, and you were going to send a message. Mm-hmm. What, mid-flight?
No, I did it 4 different times. Planned to do it more than that, but I had time to do it 4 different times during my rest period. It took about 7 minutes each time to organize the standard Zener symbols in accordance with random numbers selected from a random number table and copied onto my knee pad. and I organized the symbols according to random orientation of the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then simply thought about each symbol in turn for 15 seconds.
And the result was that it would have been 1 in 3,000. It could have been
that chance could have produced that result.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was very significant. It was quite in keeping with what scientists had found in the laboratory for 30 years or more.
Did NASA know you were going to do that?
No, they did not.
Had they known, would they have been happy?
Not particularly.
So there you have it. That was kind of the whole beginnings of it, and not the entire thing. We're going to keep going a lot deeper here because we're talking again tonight about the critical moments and events that showed the government and these secret programs that this phenomena was legitimate and that these things could happen. So imagine that at Montauk, they came through all these breakthroughs and discoveries with Uri Puharich, with this channeling, with this remote viewing, with the technology that they were using. And suddenly he's hearing voices from Enki and the Nine from Egypt. And they're trying to figure all this stuff out. So let's just take it at face value, like pretend like it's real and it really happened. And these guys aren't lying to get like funding for their programs and stuff. Just imagine that it's real for a minute. So what they do is this secret experiment with Edgar Mitchell to try and see if it works all the way to the moon. So if you have an ancient sacred site and it amplifies your experiences, what happens if you leave the Earth in the electromagnetic field of the Earth? Does telepathy stop? Does it get worse? Does it get better? Does it get worse? And so he did 4 experiments all the way to the moon and back, and the results were statistically significant enough that they realized it didn't even matter if a guy was walking on the moon. He was able to tell what shapes and colors on the Zener cards were. So he was able to pass the telepathy test. It didn't even have to be on the electromagnetic field of the Earth. So suddenly in this program, they're like, whoa, this is like a huge moment and a breakthrough. And so what happened was Edgar Mitchell came back from the moon and was fully vested now in this psychic spy program. He joined the team there at Stanford. He joined up with this Dr. Hal Puthoff, right here that you see. And then here he is with Verner Von Braun, Uri Geller, Hal Puthoff, and Edgar Mitchell. And this becomes one of the huge critical moments. This photograph right here actually captures the beginnings of the UFO crash recovery program that combined finally with the psychic spy program, and how those two things suddenly merged, and why today you have people like Jacob Barber and his colleagues coming out that are Delta Force operators and Green Beret Special Forces guys saying that they use remote viewing and they use these same methods in order to take control of UFOs, bring them down, or crash them, basically through telepathy, they hijack the control systems, pilot the UFO down, and then these teams go in and capture them for Lockheed or something, Lockheed Martin. So it's pretty wild. But this is the first incident and the proof that if that program is real, this is literally the day that it all began. And we're about to hear the story of what happened.
This is Uri Geller. One of the types of demonstrations that Geller likes to do is to sit with a group of people and attempt to send a number to various people in the room. With Uri Geller, this is Edgar Mitchell, who, with his eyes covered, is trying to pick up the number that Geller is sending. Also, we see Wilbur Franklin of Kent State, Harold Puthoff, and Russell Targ of SRI, along with Don Schuick, Vice President for Research at SRI. This is the chart recording of the magnetometer fluctuations produced by Geller. We see here full-scale fluctuations of 0.3 of a Gauss, which is a significant magnetic field, comparable to the Earth's field. After each of these experiments, we would in general discuss the results with Geller.
It's literally Uri Geller and Hal Puthoff at Stanford Research Institute and the origins of this whole program. So they're seeing if his thoughts can actually affect reality outside of his body. Can he think about the device, like the magnetometer on the counter in the sealed vacuum tube, and just by thinking about it, can he affect the waveform on those charts, and can he affect reality that way? And over and over again, they seem to prove that that was real and that was true, that telepathy, psychokinesis, and that kind of thing, there is something real to that. And truth be told, we'll get into this a little bit too, but Hal Puthoff, who you're seeing right here, he was the mentor and the trainer for my current colleague, Dr. Jim Segala, who has combined all of these devices like the magnetometer, the gamma ray sensors, all of this stuff that they were doing with Uri Geller is now part of what is called the Modular Unidentified Phenomena Alert System. And I'm actually his colleague, and we're teamed up on this. And we have 10,000 sensors that we're giving away for free right now. So in the link in the description box of this video, you can go take a survey. Everything that Uri Geller was doing in this video back in Stanford with Hal Puthoff has evolved, and today is this Modular Unidentified Phenomena Alert System study. We call it MUPAS for short. That's the acronym. But you can get a MUPAS device and actually join phase 2 of the study and know 100% confidence that it came from the origins of this actual program, and we're still doing it. Instead of it just being Uri Geller, we have 10,000 sensor units and a whole online software program and AI monitoring it and all of that stuff to track the data if this is real or not. These are the gamma waves that I've been experiencing the last few days.
What the heck?
So this is when this is what we're talking about here. Your reaction is so good. I love that. No, that's great.
I never actually went into your device in a long time. I haven't really looked at this.
So these are correlative, especially these ones. If we can, here's what's cool. You can even go into these waves and like select a section like this, I noticed, and it will just zoom in on those parts that you're looking at.
If you see on the left there, you got that underneath the arrow. Click into that. And you get
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, and then you can click on a graph, like if you can click on right there. So click like anywhere on the graph, and then you can put your observation in.
Oh, and then you can type the journal entry right there.
See whatever you want. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, and then because if you have other observers that are looking at that, they'll get an alert. And
gotcha.
Yeah, so
right on that spot, I could click here and then put
and then everybody will look at that and say, "Oh my God, get out of the house."
Right. So I've been
I'm just kidding.
Show him the strip chart recording and talk about the significance of his experiments. He was very interested in the experiments we were doing because he had never taken part in laboratory experiments of this kind before.
Now, listen, you've already flagged the other major incident in your career that touches on UFOs. And again, Edgar Mitchell has confirmed a large part of this story to my friend privately. During his lifetime, Edgar, the Apollo 14 lunar module pilot astronaut, was unwilling to say publicly that he'd ever had definitive proof of alien life. But privately, he confided in friends, and I've reported this in my book, that he was aware when he had experiences on the moon, he was aware that they were being observed. And he talked to my friend about blue lights that were clearly some kind of structured craft that were following the astronauts during their time in their lunar journey. But he also talked privately to people about something that happened, I believe, at the Goddard Space Center with Verner Von Braun, the father of America's space program, the former Nazi, who I understand embraced you as a friend, even though I'm sure as an Israeli Jew, you must have felt very uncomfortable with his background. But it must have been a very interesting meeting. And I'm intrigued if you can tell me, please, the story of what transpired between you and Dr. Verner Von Braun.
Okay, first of all, what Edgar Mitchell described you on the moon, that's a tiny thing. Yes, they were followed, but the big thing is, and Edgar says it outright, that a UFO, a craft, crashed on planet Earth. They pulled out bodies of aliens. And that's what Verner Von Braun wanted to show me.
Really quick, if you go back and watch the video on my YouTube channel where Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, is the thumbnail, the first time we really dug into this story, we actually deep dived into the metamaterial, into a piece of UFO crash material, and we proved that Edgar Mitchell not only was the Apollo 14 astronaut that went to the moon and did the remote viewing experiments that helped start the psychic spy program, but he was also born in Roswell, New Mexico, and grew up a lot of his childhood there. And he was the guy that went back to Roswell, talked to the locals there, and was given actual smuggled crash recovery material that was given to the radio host Art Bell in Las Vegas, Nevada on Coast to Coast AM. He gave it to Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe then gave it to Travis Taylor, who's now at Skinwalker Ranch as his job. And Travis Taylor then gave it to Dr. Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff has that metamaterial to this day with Tom DeLonge at To the Stars Academy. That's where it is right now. And it might even be this exact same piece of material that he's talking about here. But that was the incident. And it was Edgar Mitchell's, the same guy that went back to Roswell and got that material and was involved. So here's Uri Geller in the middle of all that. Edgar Mitchell was right at the heart of this whole story.
First of all, what Edgar Mitchell described you on the moon, that's a tiny thing. Yes, they were followed, but the big thing is, and Edgar says it outright, that a UFO, a craft, crashed on planet Earth. They pulled out bodies of aliens. And that's what Verner Von Braun wanted to show me. This is a photograph of Verner Von Braun and me. He's taking me into his limo, and we drive off to a huge concrete building. But let me now backtrack. One day, Ed Mitchell calls me up and says to me, Uri, there's a very important doctor who wants to meet with you. I said, fine. He says he's a NASA scientist. I said, fine, who is he? He says to me, he's Dr. Verner Von Braun. I say, what? Dr. Verner Von Braun wants to meet me? Dr. Verner Von Braun was a Nazi. I've got photographs in the museum here. He's among Gestapo officers. I was shocked when Ed Mitchell told me that, but I couldn't resist. No way. So in the end, with some conflict in my mind, because half of my family were murdered by Nazis, I say to Ed, take me. We get to a NASA base, and by the way, at that time I worked with the CIA, and the CIA gave me a tiny Minox German camera. It's also hanging here on the wall, because I spied for the CIA in Mexico, because I was very close to the president of Mexico, and the CIA gave me some missions to do in Mexico. I take that little camera with me, and I give it to my brother-in-law. And I say to Shippy, his name is Shippy, short for Samson. I say to him, Shippy, when we enter Verner Von Braun's office, you've got to snap a photo, because nobody will believe me. So we enter Verner Von Braun's office. Mitchell is with me, Shippy is with me, and there was a CIA man with us too. The first thing that Verner Von Braun does, he pulls out of his pocket a tiny little piece of metal, and Shippy snaps. And
this is the photo. This is the exact photo that his brother-in-law Shippy took when he was taken to see Verner Von Braun with Edgar Mitchell and the CIA agent, who is clearly Hal Puthoff, Dr. Hal Puthoff. And this is them looking at the thing. So let's check this out.
And Verner asks me to touch the metal and tell him what I feel it is. So I place my finger on the piece of metal, and I tell him, Verner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO. Okay, wow. Then he says to me, come with me. He takes me.
Okay, before we get to this part, because this part's crazy. The next part's totally crazy. But did you catch all that? This was the first time that we know of that a piece of alleged UFO material is handed to an alleged psychic. And when he touches that material, he has some kind of an experience where he knows that this is not from Earth, and he's able to retrieve information just by touching or being close to this tiny little piece. Again, imagine the breakthrough that was for them. To us, it all just looks like a photo, like they're just like hanging out looking at something that he's hanging on to. But this is someone who's been to the moon and done remote viewing. This is physicist and engineer Dr. Hal Puthoff. And you've got Uri Geller and the head of NASA, Verner Von Braun. And they just realized that through telepathy, not only does it not matter if you're in a laboratory at Montauk, it doesn't matter if you're out in an ancient canyon or in the pyramids, or if you're even on a spaceship going to the moon or back. If the person is somehow connected or has the ability to explore their own human consciousness, they innately have this ability to where Uri Geller, if this story is true, Verner Von Braun brought out this little fragment of metal. It could have been a piece of tinfoil for all he knew. And when he touched it or looked at it, he knew that it was not from Earth. And then all of a sudden, Verner Von Braun, Edgar Mitchell is smiling really big. They realize this is real. Like something about this material is interfaced with consciousness. Like something about the way that this material was recovered and even crashed had to do with that, with radio waves and consciousness in these early experiments. And so all of this is tied together, and it goes back to this exact moment when this photo was taken that Uri Geller had his brother-in-law sneak for him, was when it all began. When they realized that the UFO crash recovery material could be connected to with the human mind through consciousness. So they took the leading test subject for the psychic spy program there, and instantly he knew that it wasn't from Earth. So that was like a big aha moment for them.
He takes me into his private office, and there is a safe in the office. He opens the safe, and inside there's a bigger piece of metal, about this big, maybe 12 inches. He holds it in his hand, and he says to me, Uri, now place your hand on the piece of metal. Tell me what you feel now. So I place the palm of my hand on the piece of metal and tell him.
Part of what I think he's leaving out of this story is I have seen black and white footage of alleged Roswell crash material. And there is not only like a metal I-beam that has like hieroglyphic symbols on it, like a language, but there's other metal panels. And one of them was a metal panel that actually had indentations like embossed into it, where you're supposed to place your hands. Like you'd put your hands, and that's how through telepathy you would interface with the UFO or with the craft. And I've seen video clips of this. I kind of wonder if that's not what he put his hand on, if he put his hand on one of those panels from the Roswell crash. And it's really weird too, because the panel, I think, has 6 fingers instead of 5. There's 6 fingers on the hand.
And then he says to me, Uri, now place your hand on the piece of metal. Tell me what you feel now. So I place the palm of my hand on the piece of metal, and I immediately tell him, Verner, this is from a UFO. And he says, you're right.
You bring up a good point there. That Chris Bledsoe also talks about how people from NASA came to him, that they showed him a piece of material, and when he touched it, said the same thing. That's not from Earth. That's from somewhere else. That's from a UFO. And that the NASA representative looked at him and said, why you? That's literally what he said to Chris Bledsoe. And Bledsoe's a good friend of mine.
Now come with me. He takes me out to the parking lot, and this is the photo. It's an enhanced photo. Somebody made it, more color. And he puts me in a limo, says, sit next to me. I sit next to him. He gives an order to the driver to drive. We drive into the heart of the base. We come to a concrete building. Nothing is written on the building. There's a soldier standing by the door. He opens the door, and Verner says to me, follow me. We go down 3 or 4 flight of floor into the abyss of the building.
Is it just you?
No, just me and Verner Von Braun. Then in the corridor of that third or fourth floor, there are hooks on the wall, and on the hooks are hanging orange Antarctica coats. You know those warm coats that you wear in Antarctica? They're orange in color, but they all had a NASA logo on. He says, put one on. And he puts one on. I don't know what the hell is going on. And then we turn around the corner. We come to a huge metal door. He opens the door, and I see an enormous refrigerator. It's cold. I walk into this cold space, and listen, Ross, I'm definitely not an idiot, and I definitely was not hypnotized. With my own eyes, I see alien bodies. Some were mangled. They're all in glass tubes. I mean, I'm just mind blown, shocked. I was stunned. I froze, and it suddenly everything dawned on me in that refrigerator room that this is all real. Everything that I believed in, it's all real. What this is?
Can you describe those bodies to me?
Very similar to the alien figures that we are used to see. The grays. Look, most of them were mangled. Yeah, most of them were. They looked like they were pulled out forcefully out of a craft, or just, I don't know, found strewn around the UFO. But it was mind blowing. Just, I mean,
what did Verner tell you about where those beings came from?
He didn't. We went back to the office. Ed Mitchell was there. Verner gave me a gift. He gave me it's here. I have the camera here. It's a German camera. He said, Uri, you can have this as a gift. I took it because I said I wanted something that belonged to Verner Von Braun. And that was the end of the story. So, but it happened. You understand that this is what I'm astonished at. That this is 50 years ago, Ross. 50 years ago, and the Americans are still sitting on this secret. What's the big deal?
It's funny. As we're talking, my friend, just in the last few days, I've interviewed the former UFO investigator for the Pentagon, Luis Elizondo. And he's gone public with me on an interview with News Nation, where he's talked about the fact that the Roswell crash in 1947 was the crash.
So check it out. He just mentioned Lou Elizondo, right? That he has talked to him about the Roswell crash and his involvement. And again, so let's just pause this. We're going to revisit this video clip here in a little bit too. But look who's in this picture together. You've got, again, Dr. Hal Puthoff. This is, I think, the former director of Lockheed Martin. And there's Lou Elizondo all together. Okay, so the connections here, we have to keep track of the people and the names and how this weaves together like a tapestry. But I'm telling you, when we think about the Men in Black, we think about the UFO crash recovery program and the psychic spy program, we imagine it being like spooks that live in some invisible realm, like we never see them and they never come out of their underground facilities. But the truth is, it's a small world. There's not a whole lot of people in this country that have the level of physics, advanced quantum physics understanding and laser physics understanding and consciousness to even face all of this. There's probably less than, 10 to 20 people that are even qualified, and even less than that would want to, so it's pretty wild when you think about it. It's actually a pretty small group of people that connect these dots all the way up to today and what's going on. They were literally all together. You've got Hal Puthoff, and there he is in the original photo with Edgar Mitchell and Uri Geller, and there they are. There's Hal Puthoff. And even to this day, I just showed you the photo, and we're going to see video clips where Hal Puthoff is working directly with Lou Elizondo, and a lot of this stuff going all the way up to Washington, D.C. So Hal Puthoff has been there since the beginning, and he's kind of the next piece of the puzzle aside from like Lou Elizondo. We're not going to get into Lou that much. I honestly would like to get him on here for an interview so I could ask him about a lot of these connections. But there he is actually handling the material in this video. There's Lou Elizondo. There's an actual piece of alleged metamaterial. There was Linda Moulton Howe with them, which I mentioned was part of that transfer. This is going to belong to the Stars Academy. And where is he getting it from? He's getting it from Linda Moulton Howe. That's who that is. That's her hands. Linda Moulton Howe. And so Linda Moulton Howe, remember, clear back in the beginning, she worked with Art Bell at Coast to Coast AM. And she was the originator that took the metamaterials called Art's Parts that allegedly came from Roswell. So somehow they ended up, there it is, there's the piece of metamaterial. They ended up going from Edgar Mitchell in Roswell to Art Bell after Art Bell did an interview with Edgar Mitchell in Las Vegas where they talked about remote viewing on the moon and they talked about Roswell. All of a sudden, a shoebox shows up at Art Bell's desk that has parts and a letter, has aluminum or metal looking parts in it and a letter saying that these are from a UFO crash from an anonymous person, probably Edgar Mitchell. And this is that piece of one of those little pieces of materials. And Linda Moulton Howe, when she very first publicly came out to talk about it in this presentation, she holds up a tape recorder and she said, the first thing that I did was sent the metamaterial after I was on the radio and we talked about the metamaterial and how it was showed up in a shoebox. A physicist called in from the DIA and said he would like to analyze it. And who was that analyst and who was that scientist from the DIA? It was Travis Taylor. This video clip was actually Travis Taylor running electromagnetic field experiments on this metamaterial. And he claimed that when you would try to interact with it or even touch it or sometimes even think about it, that this piece of metal would lift up off of this insulator thing that he created, like static electricity insulator thing that he made, that it would lift up and move around like it had anti-gravity clear back then. This was before he worked at Skinwalker Ranch, before he was even involved there or anything, but it was definitely him. And I actually texted Travis Taylor when I saw this video of Linda Moulton Howe and she mentioned him. And Travis Taylor's reaction to me was, yeah, everybody says it was Hal Puthoff. He goes, yeah, everybody says it was Hal Puthoff that tested it first and nobody gives me credit for that. That's literally what Travis said to me when I asked him about the metamaterial, but he was actually the first one to test it. So, and the other fascinating thing is Travis Taylor has written a book about the law of attraction. He has published a book called The Science Behind the Secret, which is an entire book about using your mind and meditation in order to manifest the life that you want. And he actually has published a book called The Science of the Secret about manifestation and the law of attraction. But he was legitimately the first one to test it. So think of why would he write a book like that when he's in the DIA and he's working on the UFO program and now he's on the History Channel, the Skinwalker Ranch? Yeah, mentalism, right? It's like remote viewing and meditation, this whole philosophy of manifestation, of how consciousness is actually part of our reality and quantum entangled with it. He's literally wrote books about that stuff. And this is him testing the metamaterial clear back then. These dots that connect are so close together that we can't even see the forest for the trees, and we're looking for this mystery, and it's literally right in our face, and it's right on TV, and it's right in our pop culture movies. So that was definitely him. Now, here is the other fascinating connection. Jacques Vallee. We're going to jump a little bit to Jacques Vallee. I've got photos of Jacques Vallee riding around visiting Skinwalker Ranch. We've got photos of him involved in Robert Bigelow's metamaterial research in Nevada.